Russia prepares to celebrate the annexation of territories in Ukraine after a series of referendums dismissed as farcical by the West. I want to tell you about how President Putin will hold a signing ceremony on Friday to annex territories under Russian occupation in Ukraine. A stage has been set up in Moscow's Red Square with billboards proclaiming the areas as part of Russia. Now, it follows hastily arranged so-called referendums that were held in Luhansk and Donetsk in the east and in Zaporizhia and Kherson in the south, which have been dismissed as a farce by Ukraine and its allies. The UN Secretary-General has warned the annexations would mark a dangerous escalation, as our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports. And a warning, this report contains some graphic details.
For months, war felt so far from Russia's capital. It's feeling much closer now. Moscow mobilized. The special operation advertised on bus stops and billboards. Russia calls them heroes, but it needs more. So more men are ordered to the call-up centres and sent to Ukraine. Conditions are basic. These draftees have no beds. These do, sort of. And he says his group is being sent straight to Ukraine without any military training. And the president? He's escalating this conflict. Tomorrow, Vladimir Putin is expected to start the annexation of 15% of Ukrainian territory. There's little excitement about that on the streets of Moscow.
I feel negative about it because it's the territory of Ukraine.
I think it is historically Russian territory.
I think it's a total disaster, not only for Ukraine, but also for Russia.
What's more, the Kremlin call-up has sparked widespread fear.
In all the years I've been covering Russia, in all the places I've been, there's one phrase more than any other I've heard from people here. We must avoid war. This country knows very well the cost of war. Millions of people were killed here fighting Nazi Germany. And yet today, the Russian leadership is calling up and sending its citizens to the front line and annexing large parts of its neighbour.
And look what can happen to those who oppose war, like Artyom Kamardin, who read out an anti-war poem. Police raided his flat and the nightmare began. Artyom's fiancée Sasha was there when the police burst in.
They dragged me across the floor by my hair. They started supergluing stickers to my face. They threatened to glue my mouth up. Then I heard the beating from the room where Artyom was. They forced him to undress. I heard how they were talking about raping him. They filmed everything they did to Artyom. They grabbed me by the hair and showed me a photo of him, naked and beaten up, covered in blood.
Russia's invasion is having devastating consequences for Ukraine and for Russia too. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, another development, Sweden's Coast Guard says it's discovered a fourth hole in the Nord Stream pipeline that runs under the Baltic Sea between Russia and Europe. NATO says the breaches have been caused by deliberate and reckless acts of sabotage. Russia has denied responsibility. With the latest, here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
It's 4 days now since these underwater pipelines were damaged, and these images of the latest leak, filmed by the Swedish military, showing that gas continues to escape unchecked. And some experts say that it might take many days before it stops. Now, the leaks are happening here in the Baltic Sea, in the southern end of pipelines that stretch 700 miles all the way from Russia down to Germany here. Now, initially, there were reports of 3 leaks here near the Danish island of Bornholm, but Swedish Coast Guards have now discovered a 4th nearby. It's not yet known what caused all this damage and disruption, but German security authorities are reported to be blaming massive explosive devices. The pipelines are largely owned and controlled by a Russian state corporation that hasn't stopped Western ministers blaming the Kremlin, saying it's trying to test European resilience.
We don't know precisely what happened, but there's no doubt that it's a planned explosion. We don't know who's behind it, but it's very serious.
The NATO military alliance blamed what it called deliberate, reckless and irresponsible acts of sabotage and promised a united and determined response if there were further attacks. The United Nations Security Council will discuss the situation tomorrow. But Russia's foreign ministry suggested that American intelligence was responsible, saying that if the Nord Stream pipelines closed, then the US could sell more of its gas to Europe.
There was a clear beneficiary in this situation. Of course, it's Washington, putting gas pipelines out of action. Please, our Western partners, share the information with us, because we've never seen anyone but you there engaging in provocations and shams.
The truth is that it may be some days before investigations begin and even longer before responsibility is established. But many countries are not waiting and are beefing up their defences, their energy facilities.
At least 23 people have died in a Russian attack on a humanitarian convoy in Ukraine's southern Zaporizhia region.
Let's talk to our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse, who's there for us this morning. Now, James, this news we heard in the last hour. Where are you, obviously, and what can you see?
It's a scene of devastation, really, Naga. We are in the city of Zaporizhia. We last spoke close to the river. We've driven about 20 minutes to... It's a large car park which had been used as a holding station for people who wanted to head back into Russian-occupied territories for a number of reasons, being at work or to reach family members. Now, the reason I'm crouching and the reason I'm by a trench is because there was another alert as we arrived, and this is always the fear with strikes like this. There is an impact, people gather to see what happens, and then it is hit again. It's known as a double tap. The Russians have used such tactics in the past, but I've got to say, you arrive to see a row of vehicles and a huge crater next to it. You can still smell burning in the air. And then it's after that that you notice the bodies. Some are covered, some aren't. There are coats, baggages strewn across a wide area. There are people here sat on their suitcases, clearly in a state of shock. And it is an incredibly difficult scene to witness because you have a city that is carrying on as normal. That's what they do. That's what people here do, despite being so close to the front line. And then you have a strike like this. Now, the victims seem to be mostly civilian, and it's hard to see this being anything other than a deliberate, targeted strike, given what this area had been used for. The authorities are saying 23 people are known to have been killed. Many more are injured, but it really is a scene of devastation with the impact caused by this missile plain to see.
You know, James, you talk about the fact that people are carrying on even though these attacks are happening. In terms of response, emergency response, what are the resources like there now? Because you've described people, you are seeing people who are dead, some who are covered, people who are just waiting. What resources are there in a country so stretched in terms of defending itself?
Ukraine seems to have prioritised trying to restore structure. We saw early on in this war where police forces were reinstated into communities which had effectively been reduced to rubble. It seems to have been a real priority for the government, and they're quite well organised now. You have the military and police officers typically working, they're everywhere here, working together. You have the police surveying the area. You have them gathering evidence. The army are here overseeing things as well, trying to make the area secure. And they're also very keen to show people what has happened. So as we speak, they're inviting journalists from different media organisations to come here to see for themselves. And this for Ukraine is very important. As much as they are looking to reclaim territory taken by the Russians, they're also hell-bent on documenting what they find. Reason being, the hope from Kiev is that one day those responsible for attacks like these will one day face justice. That, when you're here in a car park like this, with dead laying next to their belongings and vehicles, that day feels a very long way off.